Welcome again to Christian Answers for today. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and I'm still talking about the recent yesterday's Supreme Court decision that imposes gay marriage on all 50 states. And we were, in the last episode, looking at some of the specifics in the decision and talking about what that means to us as Americans. And today I want to continue doing that, talk about some of the specifics in the decision. Let's first of all talk about the specific court members. The Supreme Court, as you know, operates on majority rule. The 9 justices sit down and hear cases and then make decision, and the majority, the 5-person majority, their will prevails. And what happened recently is that 5 of the 9 members of the Supreme Court decided that it is within the constitutional right of the United States to redefine the institution of marriage. And they so-called right that they found somewhere in the Constitution. It's still unclear exactly where they found that right. They're trying to say that it's involving the liberty and the right to privacy and the right to freedom under due process and all kinds of things. It gets a little fuzzy. It's really hard and difficult to see exactly where the Constitution says that it's the right of the Supreme Court justices to redefine something like marriage. But you have to remember that the majority members of the Supreme Court were all activists. Most of them were activists, maybe not all of them, but many of them, the majority of the Supreme Court justices were all gay activists long before they even became justices of the Supreme Court. And this is totally reflecting in their decision and how they went about reasoning their decision. These members, for example, Ruth Bader Ginsburg was outperforming same-sex marriages weeks and months before this decision was handed down. This shows a total lack of respect for her office. She is a court justice, and evidently she feels so safe and secure in her position. Her job security is so safe and secure that she can do anything she wants, even if it's totally out of line, even if it's totally inappropriate. You would think that a sitting Supreme Court Justice, Ruth Bader Ginsburg, out of decorum and protocol, involving an issue that she herself was ruling on, and the judgment would be handed down just in a matter of weeks or months, you would think that she would constrain herself, control herself, to not flaunt her authority and arrogantly march around in public performing same-sex marriages. You would think that she would restrain from that until after this ruling, so that then she would not be doing something that would be in the face of a lot of Americans and flaunting her authority as a Supreme Court justice. But no, she went ahead and did that. She was openly performing same-sex marriages whenever she wanted to. No regard to decorum, no regard for protocol. It's raw power, people. We're talking about raw power. We're talking about people in positions of power that cannot be touched, that cannot be removed. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg is just an example of that. But the others are just as much activists. And they have an agenda, and they want that agenda pushed on the United States. And unfortunately, we are the victims in this case. We are the ones that will have to suffer in the future for the mistakes. And Ruth Bader Ginsburg is such an activist that she didn't even wait for the decision to come down, and she was already performing same-sex marriages, and she sits on the very court that handed down the decision. So even before the decision comes in, she's already out there performing same-sex marriages. This is totally unprecedented in disrespect. So she's an activist, and these people are doing what they did before they were even Supreme Court justices. They are agitating and they're activists for these progressive causes. Now, some of the parts of the ruling are outright deceptive. For example, one of the lines, it says, as all parties agree, many same-sex couples provide loving and nurturing homes to their children, whether biological or adopted. That's deceptive. That sentence is deceptive. Whether biological or adopted. How do you have a biological child from a same-sex couple? You can't. So what is this sentence saying? Well, it probably is trying to say that maybe it's a biological child to one of them. That's the only thing it could say. Adopted, we understand. A same-sex couple can adopt a child, yes. But can a same-sex couple produce a biological child? No. Well, why does it say in this sentence that, as all parties agree, many same-sex couples provide loving and nurturing homes to their children, whether biological or adopted? It's trying to deceive and communicate this idea that a same-sex couple can be just like a regular heterosexual couple, have biological children. That is a false deception. And if you don't read that carefully, you're going to fall for that. You're going to, oh, yeah, they're just like everybody else. They can have children, adopt, or have biological children. No, they can't. There is an impossibility in two of the same sex having a child. And so they have to go outside of their own biology and adopt in order to have children. And so this is a deception written into the law, probably written with the intent of trying to deceive and trying to smooth over the fact that same-sex couples cannot have children biologically, and yet it's trying to communicate that they can have children biologically. So that is a case of deception. Now, another deception that the decision renders is it talks about and really encourages marriage. It talks about marriage and how honorable marriage is and how important marriage is, and goes on and on about marriage. Yes, it is, but marriage as defined as a man and a woman, that's the whole point. So when it's talking about the glories of marriage, it's actually quoting people and descriptions and conditions that apply only to male and female relationships. And many of them cannot apply to same-sex relationships. So they're deceptive in that sense, where you talk about the great benefits of marriage and then through sleight of hand change it and include same-sex couples in that. That's deception, because all of those descriptions, most of those descriptions do not apply to same-sex couples, cannot apply to same-sex couples, because, as in the case of the biological factor, they can't have children, not even in principle. One of the arguments is, well, not all heterosexual couples can have children or choose to have children. No, but in principle, the physical architecture, the biological apparatuses are there to have children. And whether they have children or not, due to some problem or due to their own choice, that's a different matter. But same-sex couples, in principle, cannot, impossible, have children biologically. Well, don't go away. We're going to be back for another segment of Christian Answers in just a short while. We're going to talk more about this Supreme Court decision. Well, we're talking further about this Supreme Court decision that was handed down yesterday that imposes gay marriage on all 50 states. And it talks in terms of these the fundamental definition of marriage they claim is not changed by adding same-sex couples to the definition. This is incorrect. If you have the most fundamental aspect of marriage, the definition of marriage is man and woman. And so if you take away the uniqueness of that aspect of the definition, man and woman, then it is no longer marriage. It is something else. Now, in the nation of England, for example, only a few years ago, they had what you call civil unions or domestic partnerships. And even somebody as active in the gay rights movement as Elton John said only a few years ago that heterosexuals have marriage, gay couples have civil unions, and that's the way it should be. Okay? That's what he said. That was only a few years ago. Well, what he said makes a lot of sense, and it could avoid a lot of problems in our country. But that's not what the gay activists want today, and that's not what they got. They wanted it all. They wanted to be called married. They wanted the status of marriage. They wanted the prestige of marriage. They wanted the benefits of marriage. They wanted everything that the standard definition of marriage gave a male and a female. They wanted that for their aberrant, irregular relationship. And the Supreme Court evidently decided, yes, we're going to give you that. We're going to give you everything that the man and woman definition of marriage gave men and women. We're going to give that to men and women and women. Now, the problem with that is it's no longer marriage. Because if part of the fundamental definition of marriage is a man and a woman, and when you change it and open it up to now include a man and a woman, then it's no longer marriage. So what we have now in the United States is a definition of marriage that is not truly and essentially a definition of marriage. And what will happen in the future, and there's no reason for this not to happen, we've already seen it. I've already seen a segment on CNN where they went and they interviewed a polyamorous family that is consisting of 3 men and I think 2 women. And they talked about how they switched back and forth, they slept with each other, and there's a total polyamorous relationship going on between all of these people. And there's a child, there are children involved also, and the children are somewhat confused, but there's going to come a time when these polyamorous communities, they're trying to call them families, are going to go to the courts and say, we want to not feel like second-class citizens. We want the full rights and privileges of marriage. And so we want the courts to recognize our polyamorous family relationships, and we want to be called married. And so you're going to have 4, 5, 6 people going to a court and asking for the right of marriage for 2 or 3 women and 2 or 3 men, all together, married all together. And you're going to see that happen in the next 5 or 10 years because there's no reason why it cannot happen. There is no constitutional reason why you cannot now say that these polyamorous relationships are not marriage any more than you could say that these 2 people of the same sex is not marriage. Once you open the door, you've opened the door. There used to be a standard. The reason why marriage was the joining of 2 people is because 2 people constitute the sexes. There is a male, 1, and a female, 2. 2 people. Marriage is 2 people, a male and a female. Okay, so once you get rid of the male-female binary pattern, now you can see that there's all kinds of possibilities. More than just 2 people. Why stop at 2 people? Why is that? Just because that's the way it's always been? Well, the courts have demolished the historical argument. They're saying we don't have to follow historical precedent. We don't have to follow ancient tradition. We don't have to follow religious precepts. We don't have to follow the customs of our culture. We can depart from that whenever we feel fit. So when the polyamorous family comes up to the court system and says, we would like you to redefine marriage to include us, there is no legal reason why Justice Kennedy and these 5 majority court members would say no, other than just arbitrarily saying, well, I don't think we're ready as a nation. I don't think we're ready as a people. It's not, in our judgment, the right time to do that or whatever, some sociological reason. But there is no logical, constitutional, legal reason why you would not open up marriage to polygamy, more than one person. You could have 5 women and 1 man, like they have in Utah, or polyamorous communities like CNN interviewed the other day. If you have a chance, go to the CNN website and look under some of their special segments. You're going to find an interview on the polyamorous communities that are popping up, and an interview with one such community. And it's going to take not very long before these communities go to the law and say, we want the same kind of laws that open the door for same-sex couples. We want that same recognition for our relationships, because we're feeling that we're being left out. We're feeling that we're being denied the same rights and privileges that now same-sex couples and heterosexual couples have in marriage. We want that same social status on our relationship. And you know what? There's nothing the courts can say to say no based on this new Supreme Court decision that was handed down. There is simply no way that you can now shut the door on polyamory and polygamy or any configuration. I don't even want to go into thinking of all the different configurations and formations of relationships that can be realized in our society that will possibly and probably come before the law in the years ahead, simply because we've departed from the male-female definition of marriage. And it's a sad day in this country to see when Supreme Court justices, and these are supposed to be the wise, old leaders in our country who are supposed to have sanity, supposed to have reasoned, principled, moral perspectives on things. And it's a sad day to see that these are the most radical revolutionaries in our society. And they're sitting on top of the leadership chain, and there is no further court of appeal. There's no way we can change what they have decided, and that's the scary part. So we're going to look further in this opinion in just a minute. Don't go away, and we'll be back in a second. Well, welcome to the third and final segment of Christian Answers. My name is Pastor Jeff Short, and I'm looking at the Supreme Court's ruling that was handed down yesterday on gay marriage, imposing it on all 50 states. One of the arguments that the decision makes is that it doesn't make any sense to be cautious. It doesn't make any sense to wait further to see how things shake out as far as in the democratic process, in debate, public discourse. The judges decided, no, we don't need to wait for any of that. People are hurting right now. They claim these people that have gay families, they're hurting, they're suffering. They need to be called marriage right now because it's going to hurt them. And the children that are in these relationships, it's really hurting them. They're suffering, undue pain and everything. We need to change society to accommodate them. My question is, what about society as a whole? What about the long-term effects of society? They totally dismiss the long-term effects of tampering with such a pillar of society as marriage. They totally blew that out and said, forget about that. We're worried about the individuals right now. This person, this gay couple, that gay couple. We're worried about how they're hurting right now. My question is, what about our whole society and how it will be hurting in about 5, 10, 15 years on down the road as this kind of deformed and distorted definition of marriage begins to settle in? We have precedent from history that societies crumble from within. We look back, for example, at the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire, when it fell, when the pagan hordes invaded Rome and basically took it without much of a fight, that never should have happened historically. The world was shocked. How could this have happened to the great Roman Empire? How could this pagan tribe and the pagan hordes just march into Rome unopposed, virtually unopposed, and destroy and sack the entire city? And how could the whole empire just crumble? And the historians have generally concluded that it was because of the loss of character, the moral decay, the immorality, the loosening of the standards of decency, the pornography, the violence, the character breakdown of the whole population. And we need to wonder, and we need to ask ourselves, will this happen to the United States? We need to be concerned about whether it will happen to the United States. We can't be as careless and loose and thoughtless as the Supreme Court Justice majority here in this decision. They say, well, we're not worried about that. We're worried about the individuals today. They're hurting. We've got to give them some kind of remedy for their suffering right now. My question is more concerned about the long-term effect of our nation. We do have time. We could have let the states decide. We could have let each individual state decide what it wants to do as far as this whole gay marriage situation. We could have let the democratic process play out. We could have let public debate continue. And now, instead of that, we have this imposition of these 5 lawyers, these Supreme Court justices, that have imposed their will upon everyone. Whether we want it or not, it's there. And they interrupted the democratic process. They interrupted the debate. They interrupted the free understanding of discourse in our country. And now they're saying, we know what's best for you guys. We know what's best. And they have basically set a course for this nation. They have set a course that is at odds with God and His Bible and His will for this people, for all people. And I'm very, very fearful for this nation because of the course that we've taken. This is an official decree handed down from on high in our Supreme Court. This comes from the highest authority in our nation's system. And that authority has said that marriage now can be made up of same-sex couples, and it is no longer the unique relationship of a man and a woman. Our Supreme Court has fundamentally altered the definition of marriage that the Bible and Christianity has taught for 2,000 years. And if you go back further, the Judeo tradition, Jewish tradition, 2,000 years before that, our Supreme Court has risen up and rejected God's understanding of marriage, and I am worried for our nation. This is a direct challenge to God's authority. This is one authority, the highest authority of our nation, is challenging the higher authority of God. And I don't believe that we're going to remain a nation much longer, the nation as we know it. I don't believe that we're going to escape judgment much longer. I think this is a direct challenge to God. It is a direct rejection of God's will at a fundamental level, the level of marriage. After all, it is pointed out even in this decision that marriage even was before government. And that lines up with the Bible because God gave Adam and Eve marriage before there was any human government, before there were any social institutions, before there was any educational system, before there was any justice system, any government, any courts, any business, any commerce, any economics. There was family, there was marriage, and God instituted it, and it has been that way forever since, in this country, recently, in the last decade or so, and our arrogant and proud people in this country symbolized by the Supreme Court justice, have thrown off God's will for their lives and have decided to fight God and rebel against God, and I don't think we have much more time. I think God is going to bring judgment on our nation or allow judgment to come on our nation, and it may be next year, it may be a couple years from now, it could even be in a few months, we don't know, but we need to get on our knees and pray that God would change this nation, that would spare us from his judgment, but in the process of sparing us would change us from our rebellious ways and head us back in the right direction, because right now we are headed on a self-destructive course. And this latest decision of the Supreme Court is just one symbol of that destruction. We are headed for a judgment that God is going to bring upon us if we do not change. This latest court decision is a slap in the face of God. It's a slap in the face of decency. It's a slap in the face of all morality. It is a caving in to the winds of change. It's a caving into the political activist agenda. I guess the principle is if you shout long enough, and if you shout hard enough, and if you're angry enough and you raise enough stink, you can even reach the Supreme Court level and you can sway the decisions of the Supreme Court. And that's exactly what has happened, because the gay activists have gotten active over the last, especially 5 years, especially with the president's backing, and they have shoved this thing down the American people. And now we have, coming from the high court, the highest authority in our land, a law, a decree that imposes gay marriage on all 50 states. People, we need to pray for this nation, and we need to pray that God spares us before the judgment and the wrath of God comes upon us. Well, I leave you with that. Keep in prayer, keep strong, stand on principle, follow God, and we'll see you back here next week. God bless.